Good morning, everyone. We are now up to Perek Gimel Mishna Hey. A quick introduction. The Torah calls Truma Rashis, the first of your grain. And we derive from the fact that Torah calls it the first, that would imply that there's something else. The Truma is the first and there's something else, which means that when you designate something for Truma, the designation has to delineate where is the Truma and where is the Chulin. In some way, it has to designate this portion is Truma and the rest of it is Chulin. How clear that designation, that delineation has to be, that we'll discuss. But that's what you need. You need a designation of Truma in which you designate, define to some degree, this is the Truma and this is the Chulin. That's the halacha. Now, if you go ahead and you actually you physically separate the truma, well, that's very clear. It's very clear what's truma, what's not truma. But we know that in order to actually separate truma, you don't have to actually physically separate it. I mean, eventually you're going to want to separate it, but it's enough to even orally declare that this is truma. And that declaration also has got to be the type of declaration that, again, delineates what's the chulin, what's not the chulin. So the Mishna begins. So, Omer Trumas Hakri Ze B'Seichai, a person who declares and says that the truma of this pile is within it. That's his statement. The truma of this pile is within it, is within the pile. Umasrei Se B'Seichai, or he says that it's maisris, it's tithes, the tenths that you have to give, whether to the Levi, the second tenth, the Meiser Sheni, the Meiser Ani, B'Seichai is within it, is within the pile. Trumas Meiser is B'Seichai. Or let's say he says the Trumas Meiser. The Meiser goes to the Levi. Levi has to separate a tenth from his tenth, give it to the Kohen. That's called Trumas Meiser, Truma of the Meiser. And he declares Trumas Meiser is B'Seichai. The Trumas Meiser of this pile is within it. Reb Shimon Omer Karashem. Reb Shimon says he has called a name, which means his designation works. According to Reb Shimon, your statement is that B'Seichai, the Truma is within it. The meaning of that is it's in the middle of it. It's in the middle of this pile. In the middle of this pile is the Truma. So that means that anything on the perimeter, anything on the outside is not Truma. It's not very clear exactly where everything is, but one thing we know, what's on the perimeter is not Truma. What's within is Truma. That, according to Reb Shimon, is enough to affect a Truma. Now, there's something very important here to point out. The Bartanura learns that this kind of definition of Truma does not really mean that I'm actually separating Truma here. Meaning, when you say, according to Reb Shimon, this person says the Truma is within. The middle is Truma. So what does that mean? Does that mean everything in the middle is Truma? The assumption is that a person is separating Truma the amount that he needs to. He's not giving extra or as much as that. He's giving his 1/50th, the average amount, whatever it is that he's deciding to give. That's what he's giving. But he's saying it's b'seichai, it's in the middle. Now, if what he's doing right now is actually affecting a separation of Truma, and according to Reb Shimon says, well, if you affect it and you say it's within, it's in the middle, so we have enough of delineation to say that Truma is with here in the middle, and we know it's not on the outside. The outside is already chulin, or at least it doesn't. Truma has been taken from that on the outside. Okay, but then in the middle, you know how many Truma is in the middle? Where in the middle? It would come out then that you have a mixture. In the middle, you're saying to say that it's in the middle is enough to clarify, okay, we know it's for sure not on the outside. All right, so that's enough according to Reb Shimon to separate your Truma. That's enough of delineation according to Reb Shimon. But where is the Truma in the middle? We don't know. So according to the Bartanura, what's actually happening here is that you are not actually separating Truma itself. What you're doing is you are separating grain from which Truma has to be taken from. According to the Bartanura, you can do Truma in stages. You can first separate an amount of grain to say the Truma will come from here. And when you say the Truma will come from here, it has to now come from here. You can't now go and say, well, I'll go to a different pile of grain and separate the truma from that pile of grain for this. You can't do that. Once you have separated an amount of grain to separate truma from, you're going to have to separate the truma from there. But you've begun the process. The process of truma has begun. And in whatever way that we could delineate the what's on the perimeter, what's on the outside, it's actually tevel. It's actually tevel. Because that first stage of truma will be enough to at least fix that which we know is not included in the truma. That's not going to be included in the truma because you left it out. But when you say the middle, you're not actually making the middle truma or saying in the middle is a truma. You're actually separating the middle as what I will separate truma from. You start the process. And for that starting of the process, says Reb Shimon, the delineation of saying in the middle, which now delineates the middle in difference to the what's on the perimeter, what's on the outside, you have now affected that first stage of truma to say that what's on the outside, truma has been taken for, and what's on the inside will be what truma will be taken from, and it can only be taken from here now. And later on, you'll separate the truma, the exact truma, the actual separate from truma, you'll do later from this pile, from this area of the pile. So that's according to Reb Shimon. Now, the Chachamim and the Chachamim say, according to the Chachamim, it's not enough just to say the middle. You have to be more specific. You have to give more of a specific area to where your truma will come from. And then the Chachamim say, what do you say? You say the truma of this pile is in the northern side, or on the southern side. Now that you've delineated at least the side, it's more specific. That, according to the Chachamim, is enough to be able to say that you have delineated. This is enough to delineate between what's truma and what's not, and what the truma is taken for. Now, there's an interesting machlokes in the Yerushalmi as to what exactly the meaning of the Chachamim is when they say on the northern side. According to one opinion, it means the northern half, the top half. According to the Chachamim, it means the northern quarter, and according to others, it's the northern eighth. And the halacha is like the Chachamim means the northern quarter. So in that northern, when you say in this northern side, you mean to say the northern quarter of this pile. That is where the truma is going to come from. If you say that, that is going to be enough to say that I have separated my designated truma, or at least the first stage of truma, in a way that that we define to some degree what is truma and what is chulin. And again, from the examples before about the meiser, the trumas meiser, all these same ideas apply. That the meiser also needs that when I'm separating meiser, and I have to know what's the meiser, I have to at least in some degree know what is meiser and what meiser is being taken for. And the same thing with the trumas meiser. Where is the trumas meiser, and what's outside of that is not going to be trumas meiser. That's what trumas meiser is being taken for. Okay. Rebbe Lezer Chisma says, Ha'omer trumas hakri mimenu alav karashem. If a person states the truma of this pile is in it, that's all he says. The truma of pile is, I'll say it a little bit more exact. The truma of the trumas hakri mimenu alav. The truma from the truma. Right, the truma for the pile is from it. That's what you're saying. The truma for the pile is from it. Have you delineated any kind of area when you say that? No. Rebbe Lezer Chisma says, if you say it, karashem, we've affected a designation. Which means, according to Rebbe Lezer Chisma, you don't need to delineate anything. You don't need to define anything. It doesn't have to be, the designation has to be a designation which in some degree delineates between the truma and what the truma is being taken for. You don't need that. And even if you say it in this kind of a general way, it's going to be considered a designation. Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov says, Ha'omer iser meiser zeh asay trumas meiser olav karashay. A person says, a tenth of this tenth is going to be trumas meiser for it. Karashem, he has called a name that means, again, he has affected a designation. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is saying, again, let's just examine the words. He says that a tenth of this tenth is made trumas meiser for it. So what exactly is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov coming to add here? So let's just review quickly the three opinions that we've had. According to Reb Shimon, if you say that the trumas meiser is b'seichai, is within it, saying it's in the middle, that's enough. The Chachamim say you got to be more specific. You got to designate a side, the north side, the south side. But as Mechispa says, you don't have to designate. You don't have to designate anything. If you declare the truma is there, it's there. Okay. As Rabbi Yaakov says, you have to. What you're saying here is you're saying a tenth of this tenth. That means to say that according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, when it comes to trumas meiser, you cannot designate trumas meiser at all unless you've separated your meiser first. That's his point. According to Reb Shimon, the three cases in the beginning were three separate cases: truma, meiser, trumas meiser. They don't mean to follow one another. It's all three separate cases. That means a person walks over to the pile, and even before he separated to meiser, and he says the truma of the meiser is within this. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says you can't do that. In order to separate trumas meiser, or even to designate where trumas meiser is going to come from, you have to have the meiser. You have to first separate the meiser. Once you separated the meiser, then all you say is a tenth from this tenth, a tenth of this meiser that you separated is trumas meiser for it. Now, did he designate where within the meiser the trumas meiser is? No. Didn't designate any area. Didn't say the middle, didn't say anything. He just said, he just number one said, you got to have you have to have the meiser. And now, once you have the meiser, then you can say the trumas meiser is in it, wherever it may be. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov comes out holding, similar to Rabbi Eliezer Chisma, that you don't necessarily need you don't have to designate any kind of area. You don't have to define any kind of area as to where is the truma and where is the rest of it. But what he does need is that when you separate trumas meiser, you have to make sure that you have the meiser separated already, because if you don't, you can't separate trumas meiser. At the end of the day, the halacha follows the opinion of the Chachamim, which is that you have to be somewhat specific and at least not just saying the middle, but a part to designate, to specify which part of this pile is going to have truma come from it. By saying the south side, the north side, that is what the halacha is. Okay. Mitzvah tzadik ches, mitzvahs lo yisaseh shlo yilechol tala. Yeah, mitzvahs lo yisaseh shlo yilechol telas haperes vazroyim. Prohibition against eating worms of fruits and seeds. Previously, we spoke about a mitzvah of worms on the ground and crawling things on the ground. Here, they are developing within the fruits and the seeds themselves. This is where they are. They're not on the ground. They are there. So we say that is prohibited to eat. Those toloyim, again, not the ones on the ground, but the ones on the fruits and the seeds, those are the ones, this is also a prohibition on them. Shenamar, as it says, for any swarming thing that swarms on the ground, you shall not eat them. The previous mitzvah that spoke about the swarming things on the ground was was in Vayikra Yud Aleph Mem Aleph, Vayikra 11:41. That pasuk says, any swarming thing and swarmed it on the ground, it should be an abomination and not be eaten. That's Pasuk Yud Aleph. Pasuk Yud Beis again says, any swarming thing on the land you shall not eat. It's a repetition of what I said before. There is coming to include something more, which are the worms of the fruits. This applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. Next, the mitzvah tzaddik test, prohibition against eating swarming creatures of the water. Again, we had before land, then we had the fruit, now we have the water. Shnamar, as it says, and this is the next pasuk, the third time the Torah repeats something similar, where it says, do not make yourselves detestable with any swarming thing that swarms. Again, what is that coming to include? There its answer is, it's coming to include what swarms in the water. What, and when we talk about Sheret Samayim, swarming creatures of the water, included in that is Hatzvardeya, frogs, Vasartan, crabs, and similar kind of sea animals, or worms and leeches, or sea animals and the sea dog. Not exactly sure what that's referring to. Maybe it's something like the chayas hayam, the beast, the sea animals means like a walrus, a dolphin. That'd be a fish. I don't know. Maybe something like maybe a walrus, a dolphin. That's what it means. The animals of the sea. Kelav hayam, the sea dog. Not sure exactly what that's referring to. The ha'eicha kazayis mehan loike. If you eat a kazayis of these things, you get lashes. This applies at all places, at all times, both by men and by women. And the final mitzvah for today is mitzvahs leisas shalecha remasim. A prohibition against eating remasim, against eating. Again, remes also means a creeping thing, a crawling thing, but that's a word we didn't have until now. The words before were sherets. Now, the word that like swarming, remes means creeping. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, again, this is the next pasuk that says something similar to the ones before, but changes the wording. You shall not defile yourselves, b'chal hasheretz, in any swarming thing, haremes ala aretz, that creeps on the ground. So what's that referring to? Remasim, when we use the word remasim, what is that referring to? Pushim. These are things that develop from molds. Not from male or female. When who eats a kazayis from them gets lashes. Applies in all places at all times, both by men and by women. Have a wonderful day.